Hey everyone, Boardgame Brody here with Meeple Mountain. I have a fresh copy of Trekking Through History. It's a time travel set collection game by Underdog Games. And before we get into this, I'd like to ask if you'd like this video and more importantly, subscribe to the channel. It's something super easy for you to do and it really helps us out. And now, what you came for, Trekking Through History. To start, let's talk about this clock here. Each player claims a color and has their own pocket watch that goes around this track here. At the beginning of the game, the player on top goes first, and as the players progress on this track, the player that is furthest behind will perform their action. If there's a point where players are on the same space on the track, then the player that is on top will perform their turn. And when you land on a space that already has a clock on it, then you will place your clock on top. So turn order will be determined by this track here, and the player's actions will determine how far they will move around the track. The game consists of turns where the active player will choose a card, move their pocket watch, so many spaces, collect their benefits, place the card in their trek, and then slide and refill the history cards. When choosing a card to play, you will either choose one of the 6 cards laid out on the board. This is known as the departure row, or you can decide to take an Ancestor card. On each history card, there is an event that you can experience, which is fun to read, but not really needed to do well in the game. There is the year the event took place, which is very important. There is the day deck that the card belongs to. You will start with day 1 cards and go through 3 different days, so there's 3 different decks. The bottom left shows how many hours the event costs to perform this action. This will determine how many spaces you will move on the clock track. And then lastly, the bottom right shows the benefits this card grants you. Each icon represents a type of experience. Person experience, event experience, innovation experience, progress experience, or wild experience, with some having these icons which represent a time crystal. The Ancestor cards are treated as history cards, except they don't have a date on it, so they can make it easier so that you can be flexible, so you can collect cards in chronological order, because in this game, that's exactly how you are building up your sets. BCE stands for Before Common Era, and the higher the number is, the older the card is. But when on the other end of the current era, the larger the number is, the more recent the card is. The next step is moving your pocket watch, the number of spaces shown on the bottom left of your chosen card. When choosing a card, you might want to consider this number, as it might be a while before you go again, if you move far on the track, that is. But you can strategically position yourself if you know or you want another card that's currently out. So this number will help you determine which history card to select during the first step of your turn. I mentioned that some cards reward you with time crystals, and these can be spent when moving your pocket watch to reduce the number of hours that you move. Each time crystal will subtract 1 hour or 1 space movement. You can spend as many as you have, but you can never make anything cost less than 1 hour. This is a time machine, but not one that costs no time. Using crystals will help you take multiple turns in a row, which will help you gain multiple cards that you want that are out. The next step is collecting benefits. Remember, those are these icons on the bottom right of the history cards. You will take 1 matching benefit resource that matches each icon on the card, plus the one that is listed on the playmat below the card. So now, selecting cards from different areas on the playmat will give you different needed resources. And why might you need these resources? Well, each player has an itinerary that they are working to fulfill, so players are choosing history cards that give them the needed resources to add to their itinerary boards. The resources are placed on the uppermost empty space of the column that matches its color. A wild experience is a wild that can be placed on any column. If you cannot place a resource on your itinerary, then you will need to return it to the supply. And if you gain time crystals from your chosen card, then you will place them in your crystal tank. Now, when placing your resources on your itinerary, if you place it on top of a point icon, you will gain those points immediately. If you fill in a horizontal row that also has a point icon on the end, you will receive those points at that time. Sometimes instead of points, you will gain time crystals, which can be used strategically to gain more turns, to gain more history cards. Finally, it's time for placing your card in the trek. If it's your first card, you will simply place it down, to start a new trek. You will be placing down cards in a series of events that are in chronological order. The more cards you have in a trek, the more points you will score from them at the end of the game. So if it's not your first card, you will either place it on top of the played out cards if its year is later than the previous cards. This is adding to your trek and making it bigger. If your card is earlier than your previous card, then it's not added to your trek. Instead, you will stack the previous cards in a stack and you will flip them over to indicate that the end of this trek has been accomplished. Then you'll place your new card face up and you will start a new trek. When taking an Ancestor card, it can be added to your current trek as you can't add a new trek to one of those cards. But the Ancestor card's date becomes the same as the previous card in your trek. So doing this can keep a trek alive and growing that would otherwise be impossible to do. And yes, you can stack Ancestor cards on top of another Ancestor card. This will keep your trek alive, but might not benefit your itinerary as much as another history card would. After all that, you will then slide the history cards in the departure row to the right, and then you will fill in any spaces with new cards. Once everyone goes around the clock track and makes it back to the 12 o'clock position, a new round begins. It might be worth it to gain a card with lots of time required near the end of the day, as you will automatically stop at that 12 o'clock mark before you start the new round. Or you can plan for the punctuality bonus. What's that, you ask? Well, if you happen to land on the 12 o'clock spot perfectly with a card or with the help of your time crystals, you will get 3 points for the punctuality bonus. After the end of each day, the decks are then changed to have different history cards in the departure row. The game starts with day 1, but we'll move on to day 2 cards and then day 3 cards. All itineraries are then discarded with all experience tokens on them. So you will need a plan to fill the best spots to score points or to gain bonuses while you can in that round. Each player will then choose one of their remaining itineraries to use for the next day. Each player starts with 4 itineraries to choose throughout the game. The game then starts again with everyone's pocket watch tokens on the 12 o'clock mark. When changing between days, your itineraries are reset, but your treks and your time crystals will stay put, and you will continue with them going forward. After 3 days, final scoring is then performed, and you will score points from history cards and itineraries throughout the game. You will score 1 point for each time crystal you have left over, and then you will add this to your trek scoring. Each trek or group of cards will score points based on the number of cards in that group. You will look at this chart here and determine your added points for each trek. The player with the most points then wins the game. And after you have played the game and understand the basics, you are then allowed to open the top secret time warps. I'll let you open those on your own as it's a pleasant added surprise to the game. And well, that's trekking through history. So what makes this game deserve your attention? Well, first, the theme is lovely, and I mean, everyone has sometime dreamed of time traveling and going to historical events to see how it truly went down. But reading all the cards and the events that take place or took place in that year is fun to visit, and if you're a huge history buff, you probably can drive more conversation around these events. It's fun to talk about these things. Well, how about the mechanics? Well, I'm more of a mechanics over a theme guy myself, although theme has definitely grown on me. But here in this game, I especially enjoy the itinerary boards. And for me, it's what actually makes this game interesting and fun and ultimately good. Everyone has different boards, so we'll be looking for different events with different resources on them. And remember that after each day, you will discard your itinerary, so timing is important so you can maximize your points and bonuses before you start a new itinerary board. The next thing I like is that your choice of which history card to visit is layered with your itinerary, but also your current trek. Both of those give you points for different reasons through the game, so at times you might choose to visit a time in history to favor one over the other, but overall, you will want to build both of those up. Points are about 50-50 split between those mechanics, but feels like it just barely tips towards the itinerary boards. Besides the surprise of how well those itinerary boards work, The next surprise were how awesome the components are. The experience tokens are plastic stamp-like resources that are nice to grab and touch. They lay nicely on the itinerary boards. The pocket watches are also the same plastic, but the size of these are perfect for keeping track of time and whose turn it is. There are plenty of cards, not all will come out each game, and the game includes game trays, which is always a time saver for setup and tear down. And the game includes the surprise time warps that you'll be able to discover on your own as well. This is a solid set collection game that makes choosing one of the 6 history cards to visit a hard choice, with which will directly affect how many points that you will score in this game. So travel through history on a 3-day tour with your family and friends in Trekking Through History by Underdog Games. Again, this is Board Game Brody, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Stick around and check out some other board game reviews to see what you might want to get to the table.